The King of Bahrain in an uncomfortable position. He's listening to perhaps some of the strongest words he may ever have to hear from a judge.
In many cases, the security forces resorted to excessive use of force. This was unnecessary. The objective was to create fear among the civilians.
The 500-page report is full of human rights abuses committed by the Bahraini authorities, from unwarranted arrests and prison torture to military trials and false accusations against detainees. It says that most of the victims were only exercising their right to free speech. The report found no violations committed by the Gulf troops sent to Bahrain. It also found no evidence of Iranian involvement in the protests. But the report also criticized the opposition. It blamed them for not having accepted concessions made by the Crown Prince in March. Doing so, it says, might have led to a peaceful resolution. On the other hand, the report mentioned aggressions directed towards the Sunnis of Bahrain, who run the tiny kingdom. The king seemed to be receptive.
You have identified serious shortcomings on the part of some organs of our government, particularly in failing to prevent instances of excessive force and mistreatment of persons placed under arrest.
Handing over the report to the king, the Sunni's task is over. Now comes the difficult part. As you can see, the king is just coming out from the room where he gave that speech. He said it was a historic day. A new page has been turned in the history of Bahrain. But the question on the mind of everyone here, particularly among the opposition, is how to turn the recommendations of that report into a real policy. The Minister of Justice suggested that he needs time to absorb the findings. Do you have any reservations with regards to any parts of this report?
As a government at this stage, I cannot tell you as a government, but even as a Minister of Justice, the report was initiated today.
And it's too early as well for a skeptical opposition to give its reaction. A few hours before the release of the report, security forces chased protesters in the streets, killing a man and spreading fear among civilians. The people of Bahrain are left wondering as to the real intentions of the government. Momamed Vall, Al Jazeera, Manama.
Well, Joe Stork is from Human Rights Watch. He joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us. Let's start with this report. How credible is it?
From what we can see, it's very credible. I mean, it's 500 pages long. It documents extensive abuses, pretty much the same kinds of abuses that we had found on the ground in Bahrain, the work we've done over the last 6+ months. Allegations of torture, the systematic use of arbitrary arrests, terribly unfair trials before special military courts, excessive force in suppressing the pro-democracy demonstrations. So those findings are quite consistent with what we found on the ground ourselves.
All right, they're consistent with what you found, but the opposition don't seem entirely happy or convinced with what this investigation has found. Let's listen into a couple of sound bites so I can get you to listen with me into why they're not happy with this.
Engineering, political engineering of the report, sexing up the report in order not to antagonize the ruler. At the end of the day, the report was financed by the ruler himself. So you don't expect the reporters, those who investigated the situation, to come out openly and harshly against their financier, the source of their finance.
They've mentioned in their statements there was 20 like officers or police officers. They used the excessive forces against the protesters. This is not the issue. As we understand, it is systematic. If it is systematic, it has to come from the top. Who is the minister responsible? The prime minister responsibility. We need to know exactly how the king himself is going to deal with the prime minister, for example, with the cabinet itself.
So, Mr. Stork, on those points, can you have a credible investigation if the buck stops with junior officers rather than higher-up officials?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that the Commission report itself said exactly that. It said it found the patterns of abuse, the systematic nature of the abuse indicated that the responsibility goes well beyond the sort of low-level personnel in the security forces, and that people at all levels, officials at all levels, need to be investigated. So I think on that count, the Commission report has it right. Now, of course, the real question is, what will the government now do? If you look at the response of the King this morning to Mr. Bassiouni's remarks, it seems like they've learned nothing. I mean, the King's remarks indicated only taking out of the report kind of what he wanted to hear. So the story is not over, but I think the report itself is we haven't had a chance to look through all 500 pages, but from what we've seen, the essence of the report seems to be pretty solid.
And let's put this all into the bigger picture, if we could, and remember why the protests began in the first place. Does this initiative by the government indicate any desire to engage with some of the demands of the protesters for more accountable government, for more constitutional government and monarchy?
Well, the appointment of the Commission itself does indicate that, perhaps. But we have to understand that this was done by the government in response to an awful lot of pressure from the United States, from EU countries, from the UN itself. So it wasn't exactly, it wasn't the idea of the government itself. The other important thing to remember is that the abuses, the attack, use of excessive force, for instance, the intolerance of peaceful assembly and so forth, this has been going on since April, since June. I mean, so all the time the Commission was at work doing its investigation, similar kinds of abuses were taking place. So that suggests to me that the people who are running the show in Bahrain today, I mean, the people who have the sort of upper hand within the ruling family, I'd have to say no, there isn't any evidence yet that they're, ready to do the right thing.
All right, Joe Stork, thanks so much for your thoughts on that.